McQuestion, talking about things that matter with people who care. Production of McQuestion is made possible in part by individual viewers, supporters of the Foundation for Responsible Television, CF Accountants and Consultants, adding value to clients throughout the region and nationally since 1956. The University of Texas at Dallas, creating the future. Sundown Ranch, one sundown at a time.
You know, this is the second in a two-part series on brain health and making the brain smarter. You'll hear how children can overcome severe trauma, how veterans are making great strides with post-traumatic stress disorder and brain damage, and perhaps the most unbelievable of all, how to reason with an adolescent. So let's get right to the panel. Starting on my left, I have Lori Cook. She's the head of pediatric brain injury programs at the Center for Brain Health at the University of Texas at Dallas. Lori, welcome to the program. We're going to be very interested in hearing about the issues you're dealing with and the great hope in what you're doing, which is great. And Mike, speaking of things that we hope are continuing to get better, Mike Riles is a Marine Corps veteran, Purple Heart recipient who recruits former military service personnel to the Center for Brain Health's Traumatic Brain Injury and Post-Traumatic Stress Studies. Mike, welcome to the program.
Pleasure to be here.
Thank you. And last but not least over here, the one that will have least credibility to start with, her name is Jackie Gamino. And she joined the Center for Brain Health in 2001, and she's a cognitive neuroscientist who serves as director of the Brain Health Teen Reasoning Institute. Okay, Jackie.
Yes.
Okay. You have something called SMART. Your boss, Sandy Chapman, wrote this book on making your brain smarter. You have something called SMART.
Yeah.
Tell us what that is. And then, for heaven's sake, try to convince us that there's a way to reason with teens, would you?
Yes. SMART stands for Strategic Memory Advanced Reasoning Training, and it's a cognitive training program that we developed at Center for Brain Health that teaches students how to understand information, to abstract meaning, how to get the big picture, and not just dwell on details themselves.
Well, how do you get their attention to start with that they need to even talk about this? May I ask that?
Well, we don't tell them what we're doing necessarily, that we're going to change them.
Oh, yes.
We tell them that we're going to improve them and make them smarter and make their brains work less hard but be more efficient so that they don't have to work as hard in school to get those same or better results.
Okay, so how do you get your subjects for your studies? I mean, you just go to random, or people have to volunteer? How does that work?
Well, there's been a history. So initially, we did do a randomized control study, which is the gold standard of science, of course, in a local public school with a group of 8th graders. We found great results in the kids who had the SMART program, but the kids who were in the control groups did not show improved reasoning. So our study has advanced, and now we actually are in public schools.
When you say you're in public schools, does that mean that some teacher there is actually teaching this, or do you go in there yourself, or how does this work?
Well, that's a good question, because in the beginning it was me and my research team that went into the schools and gave the program to the children. And now we have expanded to the point where we're actually training teachers to train their students, so we can reach even more students.
Yeah, that's the point.
Yeah.
You have to, if it works, why not have it for everybody? Because if it worked and some friend of mine had it and I didn't get it, well, I'd be a little miffed about that, don't you think?
Exactly.
Cool. See how good my teen reasoning is?
It's very
right
good.
There. By the way, is there anything in here about teaching male students how to get girls? Is there anything in there about that at all?
A little.
Well, I was going to say that would make them more interested in taking it. I don't know if that's smarter, or I guess guys get dumber about those things, don't they? I don't know. I shouldn't get off on that. Speaking of hard things to deal with, not teenagers, but veterans. Mike, you are one.
Yes, sir.
How'd you find your way to the Brain Center, and what in the heck are you doing?
Well, I am recruiting veterans there. I'm the Veteran Outreach Coordinator at the Center for Brain Health. I found myself getting there actually as a participant. I participated in the post-traumatic stress disorder study and the traumatic brain injury study. I found myself kind of struggling as a civilian when I was in the Marine Corps. I was in charge of 43 guys, picked up sergeant in 2.5 years. kind of the poster Marine, if you will, and was kind of wounded. And then when I got out in 2008, I was struggling a little bit. Had 2 guys that committed suicide, 2 of my buddies, and it was kind of a reality check to me to find out what's going on. I began studying psychology, and then went through the study at the Center for Brain Health. I like to call it recalibrating my mind, if you will, from what the service did and what my life was like then did, and now I'm out recalibrating other warriors.
Yeah. Well, when you were having a difficult time, I mean, that's not unusual for veterans, right? Number one.
No, not at all.
Are there other programs for veterans to help them through this, or is this just sort of one of a very unique number of things that are being done to help them?
There's a lot of programs out there. I would say there's a lot of therapies. There's horse therapy. There's Heroes on the Water. They're really doing great things with veterans. But I think one of the big ones is the education. At the Center for Brain Health, you're going to learn about your mind, how the mind works, and what combat or what military life did to your mind, and then how to recalibrate that mind and how to readjust to civilian life with the tools that you learned while you were in.
Why do I think, Mike, and I may be wrong about this, but why do I think that there are a lot of people in Congress over the years, and maybe even with the Veterans Administration, who just sort of said PTSD didn't exist? I mean, it's in their mind. I mean, literally, without any joke here, that's in their mind, that there really wasn't something physiological about this. Am I right that that was the thinking for a long time, or not?
I think it was always there. I think the expression or the veterans outlash, like I know drugs and alcohol, those are common things. Not just veterans do them. Everyone in society can get addicted to something. I think veterans dealing with the transition or dealing with the chronic stress of being overseas and then coming back without the purpose or the community that they had while they were in, they try to express themselves in some way. And a lot of those are in common ways that we deal with society in general. So it's attributed to the veteran instead of post-traumatic stress.
Exactly. So can you give us, for those of us who've never had this, can you give us, I don't even know how to ask the question, but is there a feeling or a thought process that you had that is somehow noticeably different today as a result of this? And I don't know if that's the right way to ask the question.
Well, I tell you, a year and a half ago, I couldn't sit in this room right here without sweating. I wouldn't even came to talk to you. I had to swallow my pride to even participate in the study that I was in, to actually seek help. I couldn't go out to the restaurants. I couldn't go shopping without keeping my head on a swivel, trying to find everything, looking for that 0.1% chance that destruction was going to happen, and I had to save the day. And that time wasn't happening, and I was hyper vigilant, and I kept planning for that, but it never came.
Wow, 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 wow. And so can you give us just a small sense of what the training is like when you're actually in it?
Well, for the post-traumatic stress, we're coupling cognitive processing therapy, which is a science-based therapy that they've used for trauma victims for quite some time. And then we're also coupling that with RTMS, which is a mouthful. It's repetitive transcranial magnetic stimulation.
I thought that's what you were talking about. Thank you, Mike.
It's a mouthful, but we're coupling those, and that's been used with individuals with depression. Mm-hmm. So we're trying to see if we can kind of calm the mind of the veterans and their flight or fight circuit. Mm-hmm. If we can calm that part of the mind, so then they can actually go receive therapy and kind of give healthy meaning to some of the traumatic things they might have witnessed overseas.
Wow, wow. I'm just delighted that you're doing that. I'm extremely delighted that you're doing this. This is a tough deal, and this is really, really a tough deal. Now, let me shift to you, Lori. I mean, I don't expect there's probably anything that pulls at people's heartstrings as much as seeing a child with an injury of any type, but particularly a brain injury. Talk to us about what you do, what you see, and sort of what's on the horizon here.
Sure. The work that we do at the Center for Brain Health, particularly I head up our pediatric brain injury programs, and they're some of the longest running programs that we've had. In fact, our Chief Director, Sandy Chapman, she's been involved in one of the longest running studies following kids and teens who've experienced any sort of acquired brain injury. So we're talking about folks who, maybe a 4-year-old who was injured on the playground, had a pretty serious head injury. The general medical world has really looked at kids traditionally as little adults. They've very much been treated that way. And what our research has shown is that is simply not true. When we consider the brain, the developing brain, the fact that a child's brain is still developing puts them in a more vulnerable position than, say, a 44-year-old individual who had a head injury as well.
Sure.
So, in fact, a lot of people aren't aware that an individual's brain, the child's brain, is developing until about 25 years of age. You know, we joke a lot that the rental car companies figured this out before the neuroscientists did.
Right.
But it's important to realize that any injury to the maturing brain, something that's still in development, can affect all that learning that has yet to occur. So imagine all the learning that is to happen for that 4-year-old who hasn't even yet entered school.
So how do you find people with these things, or do they find you? And then secondly, how do you measure what the damage may be?
Well, you know, as they've talked about in the previous segment, our brain imaging tools have certainly improved of late to give some insight into the nature of the injury itself. But more importantly, we're finding that if you really hone in on those skills that are likely to develop over time, that might emerge down the road, those can be particularly important areas to monitor. We're talking about areas that are governed largely by the frontal regions of the brain. This is the last region of the brain to develop, really kicking into gear during those adolescent years. So it may not be unusual, in fact, to see that same 4-year-old girl who was injured actually bounce back quite well when it comes to going through elementary school, getting in the groove with things, and then suddenly, say at about middle school, about age 12, just really seeing a backslide in performance, both academically, maybe even socially, behaviorally, and at that point, you know, many people don't even think to attribute it to that earlier injury.
No, I would have thought it was just because of puberty is what I would have thought.
Exactly.
And you're telling me it could be something else, is what you're saying.
Absolutely, and that's why it is so important to have a long-term monitoring system. You know, and one of the reasons for that phenomenon, Dr. Chapman in her research has coined this the neurocognitive stall. Essentially what we're seeing, it's as though these later emerging deficits are happening. They're going into their deficits such that when they hit those crucial next development stages, they're plateauing and their peers, you know, keep going up. So what we want to do is really find these kids early on in particular and help give them the supports that they're going to need so that they don't plateau. And if we do find those individuals who do, we could really do a lot to put them back up on that upward trajectory.
You know, that is just great, and I applaud all of you for doing that. While I'm talking to you, bring this former teacher over here. I suspect that Paulette has, as she always does, a pertinent question for one or more of you, so go for it, young lady.
Okay, sadly, one of my former students is in prison in North Carolina right now with PTSD. He came back, had